Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm coming to you today from the Midland in Kansas City. We'll do a show here later on tonight, but I wanted to make a quick video about instruments that are really important to me, both for this show and for my studio life as well. This is purely just an opinion video for me. I wasn't asked to make it. And although I do have a really great relationship with this company, they had nothing to do with me wanting to make this video. I just really wanted to make it. So here we go. Why Fodera Basses? Well, it all goes back to me being about 14 years old or so and starting to really get into finding the best musicians on their each respective instruments. And I happened to come across this one video. Not only was I super amazed and wowed by the talent that I was watching, but I also noticed that the instrument had a really unique sound. And it didn't hurt that it was incredibly beautiful too. So I started looking around to try to figure out what this is. And before long, somebody turned me on to Fodera Basses. For those of you who don't know, Fodera is an exceptionally well-crafted instrument made by hand by a bunch of really great people in Brooklyn, New York. And although the instruments are very expensive, you really get what you pay for. Building an instrument with them is typically a very customized experience. For instance, they do make a lot of what they would call standard instruments now, which is one just like this. But for years and years, the primary business that they did was making custom instruments. So basically choosing woods and options for every single part of the bass. Since 1983 or so, they've had an incredible artist roster of people. Victor Wooten, obviously, Oteil Burbridge, Matt Garrison, Tony Gray, and tons of other great players. So back to me being 14 years old when I was finding out what these basses were. Owning something like this is a bit of a dream for a musician, to have something that's fully crafted for you. And years later, I would find some music stores on tour, and every once in a while, I would find one that would pop up, and I knew that I'd never be able to afford it, but just to try it, I would put my hands on it and play for a little bit, and I discovered an instrument that fit me physically and tonally really well. Every single one of them that I tried was just so wonderful, but again, really out of reach. So fast forward to 2020, the pandemic hits, and I wasn't able to practice almost anything, but I was able to play a lot of bass. Particularly, I had a fretless bass that I loved that I was practicing a lot. And although it's a wonderful instrument for a lot of people, I didn't realize that it physically was not a good instrument for me. It made my hands work too hard to play. In the process, I injured myself really badly. And the outcome of it was that I really had to start thinking about playing instruments that really fit what my hands were asking for. You know, it couldn't bring me too much tension. I shouldn't have to work as hard to play. And so I started thinking so much about trying to find the right instrument for me, considering how much bass I play and how much I really do love to play bass. So I know we're a little bit out of order, but stepping slightly backwards here, I think it was a year previous, I was in Syracuse, New York, hanging out with a good friend of mine, Jim Hool, whose photography you've probably seen a lot for Brit Floyd stuff. And Jim told me that there was a great guitar and bass shop in town that he wanted to take me to, and especially the head Fodera basses. So I went with him to the shop. I ended up really falling in love with the bass, and he took a video of it and we put it up on my social accounts. And I'm pretty sure in like 24 or 48 hours, it had 50,000 views. I forgot to mention it had that many views because Fodera actually saw this and reposted it. And so me being appreciative, I called them up a day or two later and just wanted to say thank you, because I mean, you know, what they did actually really helped me out a whole lot. I invited them to the show. Thankfully, we were playing in New York City a couple of days later. And although they weren't able to make it for that show, I ended up starting to have some communications with the company overall. And it was looking more and more likely that I might actually be able to get an instrument made for me. In the process of this too, I was talking to my wife a little bit about this and found out that years previous, when we were just still dating, like 2013 or something like that, she was coming to the NAMM show and other music industry trade shows with me, and I found out that she was sneaking over to Fodera to discuss making an instrument for me even way back then. She's really cool. So getting an instrument made for you is a really special thing. I think for me, what made it so special was the fact that I was somewhat receiving an answer of how to get a little bit more longevity in the music industry in terms of the health of my hands. I was going to be able to make an instrument with these people that was going to suit me so much better and make everything more playable. And in the long run, that also means for me too, like, hey, maybe I might be able to have a career longer than I thought I did. Like having injuries as a musician with your hands or your feet, if you're a drummer or whatever, it's scary. It immediately makes you think about, am I going to continue to work in this industry like this? So I was super glad at some point I was able to go into the Fodera shop and meet with everybody and hand pick every single one of the options for my first instrument, which was a 5-string Emperor model. It had a flamed light koa top, a roasted ash body, a 3-piece maple neck, and a Macassar ebony fingerboard. This to me was kind of my ultimate build. If I was only ever going to have one of these, I wanted it to suit like 90% of the stuff that I play. And so I built this out with all of those things in mind, tonally and feel-wise. And speaking of feel-wise, I was able to go back to Fodera to hang with my buddy Dan Balcom, who cut the neck and the body so that it fit me. It was a little bit more ergonomic for me. And there's tons of options I could have chosen on this bass, you know, different tuners for weight, different pickup configurations for different tones. I ended up going with the Seymour Duncan dual coils, which you can split the pickups and you can get both like humbucker tones and J bass tones, which is really cool. So, but at the point that I had gotten this instrument and I was thinking about what I was working on with Brit Floyd, I was also thinking about making a bass for that as well. I mean, depending on the year, I play between 1 and maybe 5 songs on bass with Brit Floyd. And so I really need to be thinking about my hands also for things like that too, especially considering, you know, maybe I'm doing that 150 times a year. So immediately we started looking at the Pink Floyd catalog and also, you know, concerning P-bass, like I have a couple of bass players that I really love, 2 in particular, James Jamerson and Pino Palladino. And so I tried to put together a bass that would fit all of that stuff so that I could do Brit Floyd primarily, but also my session work on the P-bass. And we came up with this. This is the Monarch P Standard Classic with Sunburst. It has an alder body, a 3-piece maple neck like my first bass, and a rosewood fretboard. Super awesome. On this bass, I string it with flats instead of round wounds like I do the rest of my basses. And this bass has a super classic P-bass sound for me. It's very, very consistent all the way up and down the fretboard, easy to handle. The weight's great. There's no neck dive. And I can say these things about all of my basses, by the way. They're just super works of art. And then finally, the last bass that I had to replace was a fretless, which I hadn't owned in a while. And that's not a huge portion of my playing that I use a fretless on, but it was important to me to have the right bass to do that with. So we ended up building a fretless also on the Emperor body. It's another 5-string, just like my first bass. This one has a golden amboina top. I was so picky about this one. I went to Fodera and hand chose this top in a lot of the woods too, because I was so particular about the sound I was looking for. It has a roasted butternut body, which I think they've only ever done 2 of, if I'm not mistaken. It has a 3-piece maple neck, just like the rest of the basses, and it has an ebony fingerboard again. I kind of augmented it a little bit with lightweight tuners so that the weight distribution would be a little bit better. Thank you so much, Dan, again, for recommending that when you were working on this bass. And that one has the same pickups as my number 1 bass, the Fodera Duncan dual coils. So again, tons and tons of tones, and it's a go-to bass for all of my fretless things. The process of working with these people is just so wonderful. I mean, I really appreciate the attention to detail about every single thing that they do. I mean, I watched them take my measurements, you know, even from the first bass and put them especially into the fretless so that they were almost identical basses, feel-wise, top to bottom, you know, the body and the neck and all of these things too. But I can tell from how they talk about these instruments that each one is so personal for them, which is really interesting to me because they've made a ton of instruments. But, you know, over the years, like I've sent a text back and forth to a couple of the guys of like a particular very pretty Fodera that I found online. And, you know, it's always that I get a text back that was like, oh yeah, I built this one in like 94 and it had this, and this options. And the customer was asking for this. And, you know, like they seem to know every bass that they build like in such intimate detail. It's really wonderful to experience people who are so deep into their craft that every portion of making an instrument like this is just so personal to them. They're just remarkably made instruments made by really great people. Again, super, super attention to detail. And I count on these for my sound, whether it's on stage with Brit Floyd or if it's in the studio working on my own stuff or client work. In fact, even every time that I've sent a recording out that I've done for a client, the engineer writes back, "Oh man, your tone on this, so good. The bass is so even. Everything speaks so cleanly and clearly." It's just a testament showing me that I made the right decision in choosing these basses. If I did one thing different about making these basses, I learned something really cool in the process of number 1 and number 3, which were the first 5-string and the 5-string fretless, which was that on the first one, I did a roasted body, which seems to kind of like pre-age the wood in terms of sound a little bit. It also makes it more stable. And I did that for the body wood, and I saw a really big result between that and a piece of wood that was not roasted. On the fretless, I roasted the body and I roasted the neck. And the tones that I get out of that are even more stable and refined. You know, it's like listening to an instrument that's been around for 60 years. It's just kind of settled in with itself, you know? So what I would have done differently was I would have also roasted the neck on bass number 1. Anyway, if you're on the edge about getting a Fodera and you're looking for reasons on why you should do it, I really think that you should at least go test it out and see if it suits you very well. But really the experience of making an instrument with these people is second to none. And I have 3 instruments that I love, absolutely love. So I hope you enjoy yours if you get it. Thanks for listening to me ramble about instruments. I'm so very, very picky about every little thing that I play. And if you like this and you wanted to see more videos about stuff like this, you know what to do. And I'll see you again next time for a non-gear related video. Bye.